We're back for our next departmental budget discussion, and first I'd like to acknowledge Councilman John Cooper has joined us this morning. I think he's the only council member who is here. I'm Mayor David Briley, and I'm joined this morning by Talia Lomax O'Neill, the city's finance director, and Emily Pacini, the chief of staff here in the mayor's office. Before we jump into this year's budget, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about last year. As you all recall, last year's budget occurred under unusual circumstances in a couple of respects, and certainly wasn't the budget that I wanted to file or that everybody had expected. Nevertheless, during the last 12 months or so, the city has buckled down and tightened its belt a little bit and lived within our means. And as a result of that, and as the result of some increase in revenue, in the coming budget cycle, we're in a position to offer 3% cost of living adjustment, steps, and open range increases for all our Metro employees in the coming year. I know that it's a good step forward for our community. It's certainly what our employees deserve and more, and we're working hard to make sure that we make progress over the coming years. Our next discussion this morning is with the police department. I see that Chief Anderson has joined us, and Chief, I'm going to turn it over to you, and if you could introduce at least the two people who are sitting with you. I see you're joined by quite a group of Metro police officers as well, but I'll ask you to do that, and then we'll probably have some questions at the end. Thank you.
So on my right, Samir Manhick, he's our Chief Finance Officer, and his assistant, Kathy Kirkland. And I know we stole Samir from Talia, and so I'm hoping that she's not wanting him back because he's very valuable to us. And certainly my privilege to be here on behalf of the 2,000 dedicated employees of the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. And also in the room, I think you mentioned, Mayor, are several of our deputy chiefs, captains, and commanders. Their daily directions and the decisions they make, their attention to detail, and their compassion for the people they serve make us one of the best, if not the best, major city police departments in the nation. And I say that with some authority. I've mentioned to you before that because we're the 24th largest city in the United States, I get a seat at the Major City Chiefs Association, so I get an inside look at what goes on in all the other major departments, and I wouldn't trade seats at that table with anyone. And I think a number of recent events over this last year will serve to remind all of Nashville of the work being performed by our officers every day, sometimes in the day, but most often when everyone else is asleep. I'm pleased to report that Officer Autumn Manning has returned to duty on the midnight shift at the South Precinct. If you'll remember, she was brutally attacked in the early morning hours of March the 3rd, and this occurred as she intervened to prevent the violent beating of another man. And we're certainly grateful for the outpouring of the community after that happened. And I'm also pleased to report that Sergeant John Bork, is working light duty and continuing to improve after being hit and dragged by the ATV down on Broadway during the SEC tournament. I'd like to mention the case of the 16-year-old who failed to go back into custody after receiving a weekend pass from Department of Children's Services. He allegedly shot an Uber driver while trying to commit a carjacking over at the Exxon station on Shelby Avenue. And it was the tremendous work by our Juvenile Crime Task Force with the assistance of one of our helicopters that resulted in his capture in an apartment complex out on Elm Hill Pike. And certainly apparent that without their quick work, we would have likely had another tragedy. Last year, we saw an increase in violent crimes being committed by juveniles, so we formed a Juvenile Crime Task Force. They've done tremendous work. Just during 2019, from January 1 through last Saturday, they have seized 44 guns and recovered 65 stolen and carjacked automobiles. They've charged 56 juveniles and 40 young adults with various criminal offenses. I'm often asked, how are the juveniles getting these guns? And we know at least part of that answer out of vehicles. Since January 1 of this year, 125 guns have been stolen during vehicle burglaries in neighborhoods throughout Nashville. We continue to ask our citizens to secure their weapons and all their belongings, especially if there's weapons in the car, lock their doors, and take their keys. And that's a message we send to all of Nashville, and especially to the 653 community and neighborhood groups that we support. Last year, our officers attended 2,171 meetings with those neighborhood and business groups. I'm very proud of the work being done by the commanders and the captains across the department, the things that they do to reach out into the community. At Hermitage Precinct, for example, they began an outreach initiative involving 13 elementary schools. Their goal was to have officers take their lunch break at the elementary schools and interact with the students in the cafeterias. And this relationship has grown into officers receiving invitations to attend other school events, plays, concerts, field days. The East Precinct officers have done great work over the past year in Casey Homes. Officers working in concert with the residents and MDHA have driven crime down in Casey. Violent crime in particular has been reduced. The West Precinct officers last year established a community engagement team in the 40th Avenue and Clifton Avenue area. Crime there has been reduced, and calls for service have also been reduced. That particular neighborhood, we have officers walking, and they're giving their cell phone numbers to the citizens so they can talk directly and become a community group. And we've just started, the West Precinct have just started a similar engagement team in the Bellevue community. We are a major city, as I mentioned, the 24th largest city in the United States, but we take a small town approach in our service to the communities across Nashville. As to the current budget, the police department will end this fiscal year within the parameters established by the Department of Finance. In other words, we will be within budget this year. Our budget request for the upcoming fiscal year totals an additional $16.8 million. This request is geared toward the enhanced safety of our neighborhoods and the implementation of the body and dash camera project. We propose growing the police department by 52 sworn officers and 25 civilian positions. Back to the body cameras and the car cameras, Metro Purchasing has been overseeing the procurement process, and as you know, this process involved much more than just giving an officer a camera and telling him or her to go to work. We're talking about a significant and continuing financial commitment by the government. The procurement process has brought us down to 3 vendors, three contestants for this project. Over the last 90 days, 21 of our officers have field tested the equipment from each of these 3 vendors. They rotated so that each officer handled all 3 for a month apiece. And the next step is the scoring of the camera, the operability, and then taking into account the cost. As part of this budget package, we're asking to create 24 new sergeant positions, 1 per shift per precinct, to manage the body camera program at the front line. We know that having a sergeant on the scene of an event drastically reduces the possibility of some violent encounter. And frankly, our sergeants necessarily have to spend too much time on administrative duties. They're taking care of investigations and other things that are necessary, certainly things that we assign them to do. We would like them to spend more time in the field. As we take on the body camera project, we know that there'll be even more administrative duties. So adding a sergeant per shift, per precinct, will allow them to spend more time in the field. Certainly, we would want to backfill after we make these promotions. We would need to hire 24 officers to take their place. We're also asking for 12 new civilian positions to support the body camera program. These would be the technicians to keep the in-car and body camera equipment operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think you know we've already been approved earlier this year to hire 3 of those. We've not received the funding. We hope that's in this package, and we need to hire the remainder. The last thing we need is to have our cameras on the shelves, but not getting them installed in the cars in a timely manner. So those are the people that actually touch the project during the installation process and during years to come. We take a car out of service if it has a headlight out, make sure it gets fixed before it goes back on. And certainly, if a body camera or a car camera is malfunctioning, we would need to take that out of service, and we need to make sure that people are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to service that, to get that officer back in service. 2 of these 12 positions would support our public affairs office. We know that we're going to have an onslaught of media requests and citizen requests to view the camera footage. And before release, we have to look at each one in detail. I think we're all painfully aware of the mass shooting in Las Vegas. And so in the aftermath of that, the Las Vegas Police Department had to review 22,000 hours of body camera and other video footage, and this had to be done before they could release it. So hopefully that never happens, certainly anywhere in the United States, and certainly not in Nashville, but we have to be prepared to manage those requests as they come in. The body camera portion of our budget request, the increase is $4.6 million, and that includes the 36 positions that I've mentioned. Our budget request also asks for funding to begin a 3-year process of staffing up to open a new 9th precinct in the Antioch neighborhood. And we've talked about that extensively, and I think that you have met with neighborhood groups in Antioch, and certainly they're very anxious. And what we would propose is hiring 22 officers. It takes 66 officers to staff that precinct. So we propose hiring 22 this year, 22 the next year, and then over this 3-year period, we'd have the 66 in place, and that should coincide with about the time that the building could be constructed and in place. And everybody here knows that Nashville is a destination city, and that's certainly a good thing. And but that brings on new duties for the police department. It's the city's obligation to make sure that these events are as reasonably safe as we can make them. Next month, for instance, this city will host the NFL draft. That is the largest event that's ever been in Nashville. And back-to-back will be the Rock and Roll Marathon. Now, the marathon is 26 miles, and that's been our most labor-intensive event to date. And I think after the Boston bombing, their marathon, we realized we have to do more than just block the streets. We have to make sure that everything is safe. So we'll have those 2 events back-to-back. And for the hockey fans, we've learned that the Predators will be in the playoff. And so there's a possibility during that time that the draft and the marathon is going on that we will have a playoff home game here. And I think if you remember a couple of years ago when we were in that position, that we had about 10,000 people in the street on Broadway. Broadway was packed all the way from First Avenue all the way up to about 9th Avenue. So that could be a big week for us.
Which is Saturday night as well.
I usually wait till 5 o'clock to talk about him.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Now, we staff these events on an overtime basis, and that's so that we don't take officers out of neighborhoods. So we can't just abandon all of Nashville to staff the neighborhoods. So over this next year, we anticipate an increase of $3 million to that budget to make sure that we can properly staff all the events. Some other items that are worthy of mention, we're requesting $300,000 to add 4 officers to our domestic violence division to investigate elder abuse and neglect. And I think we've talked about this in the past. This is part of a new Tennessee law that requires the establishment of a volunteer adult protective investigative team. So various entities across the government are involved in that, and certainly we need to be doing our part as the police department. We're also asking for $200,000 additional dollars to equip our crime lab with the chemicals and enhance the scientific work that occurs there. The crime lab is paying benefits every day. It's really allows our officers more timely processing of evidence and allows us to make cases at an earlier and more timely basis. But there is a cost to that, and so we want to make sure that that we don't have a backlog on any particular evidence processing because of lack of supplies to do that. Narcan. We deployed Narcan back in August of 2017. As you know, Narcan is the drug that counteracts opioid overdoses. And during that time, we have used it at least 25 times in saving lives. Our request involves $112,000 to ensure that we keep a supply of that on hand. Although we put about 600 doses out there with our officers, we'll equip 600 officers with it, and we've only used it a few times relative to that 600. It has a shelf life, and certainly it's sensitive to heat and the cold, and our officers are out in the heat and the cold all the time. And even on shelf under controlled conditions, it has a shelf life of about 2 years. We're also requesting $173,000 to replace our bulletproof vest. Formerly, we were able to do that with grant funds from the federal government. That funding source has somewhat dried up, and we replace them on a rotating basis, and so we schedule a certain number of officers to be replaced every year. And one of the things that we desperately need is $112,000 for our recruiting efforts. We're looking at a company called Career Builder to target and advertise our recruitment process across the nation. Law enforcement agencies all across the nation are having a difficult time recruiting, and certainly that's true here in Nashville. About 50% of our applicants come from out of state, and so we want to make sure that we're reaching to all the corners of the nation to gather everybody we can. We're authorized currently 1,511 officers. As of today, we're at 1,390. We'll graduate a class of 53 next week and add them. Of course, they got to go through about 6 months field training before we can actually turn them loose on their own. And then we start a new class last week, and we have 53 recruits in that class. And they will graduate in August of this year, and their field training would be completed January, February of next year. We're competing with all the other law enforcement agencies across the nation, and so we need to enhance our recruitment efforts. Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity to present this budget request, and the men and women of this police department remain committed to the service of Nashville, and they're doing great things across Nashville. I'm proud to be a part of what they do, and we'd be pleased to take any questions.
That's a lot. I don't think that you all submitted any Blue Ribbon Commission suggestions, so I just wanted to kind of get some feedback from you on that.
To my knowledge, we did not get any recommendations. I met with a couple of gentlemen from the Blue Ribbon Committee,
Okay.
and there weren't at that time, and I'm not sure whether the final report is out, but to date, we have not received any recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we touched on that since we didn't have anything. I'm good, Mayor.
Can you talk a little bit about the new building and how that is working to improve communications and overall trust in the community?
Well, I think we're pleased to move into our new headquarters building out on Murfreesboro Road. For those of the public that do not know, it's the site of the former Capital Chevrolet, 600 Murfreesboro Road. The best thing I can say about that building is that we're all now under one roof. And for years, we've been spread across Nashville. It's having all of our detectives, or at least our specialized detectives there under that one roof, makes management makes it easier for me to keep up with what is going on, allows them to interact amongst each other, exchange ideas, exchange thought processes, and they have a place to work. They're not crowded. Each of them has a workstation. They have ample parking in the back, so I think it's not only greatly improved the efficiency of the department, it's certainly improved the working conditions of the people that actually do the work, the officers out there on the street. And parking, there's ample parking, and that's always a plus for the employees. So we're very pleased.
I think I do have one more question. For just clarification for the listening audience because it's about the 9th precinct. We have acquired the land, but we've not yet done a capital spending allocation to build the facility. And I just wanted to make sure that people understand that that kind of has to happen first.
Exactly, and you know, for everybody outside the government, you know, this is the government, and there is a process to follow, and certainly understand that, and that's the reason that when I talked about hiring to staff that precinct, 22 per year to build up to that, because it will take about 3 years if we started today to complete that process.
And I would share for the listening audience that it's typical on how we have funded other precincts in the past to kind of do that staging, as the chief is describing.
Certainly. And one of the things I would add about adding a precinct in the Antioch neighborhood, when we add a precinct, we have 533 square miles here in Nashville, and each time we add a precinct, it decreases the size of other precincts and allows those commanders and the men and women that work there to be closer to their neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, Chief, I appreciate your coming to present your budget today. The last year, I have probably been as close a observer as anybody in Nashville of both the success of our community and the consequences of that success. But I know our police department, the men and women who are out there every day, are probably the ones who are having to confront it as much as anybody in government. And so I thank you and your department for all the hard work in the last year, and I know it hasn't always been under ideal circumstances. And our community is committed over the coming years to making sure we provide our police department with all the resources that are necessary to keep our city safe. And I know I should knock on wood when I say this, but I do look at the CompStat report every week when it comes out, and I think the last CompStat report that I looked at from March 16th showed a good trend line when it comes to violent crime in our community, downward trend, especially during this calendar year. And so I attribute that in great part to the hard work of the men and women who are out there protecting the city every day. So on behalf of the city, I hope you'll convey to your men and women that we thank them for their hard work.
I do that every day, and thank you for saying that also, that it's the men and women on the street that make the difference.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.